Storytelling can get pretty bizarre when you think about it. There are so many delightful ways to convolute the fundamentally simple process of relating a series of events, so many strange tools, differing perspectives, differing timeframes, descents into symbolism and abstraction, the battle between the prosaic and the poetic. The list goes on and on. Writers will do just about anything to tell the story in the way that they mean to tell it, even if that means telling the story by telling a different story altogether. For how strange a device it is, stories within stories are surprisingly common, especially in fiction. You see this all over. The Kingkiller Chronicle by Patrick Rothfuss is an incredibly epic fantasy about one of the greatest heroes who ever lived, but it's also the wistful backstory of a washed-up barkeep. The Princess Bride is a grand adventure, yes, but within the fiction, it's also just a bedtime story being told by a grandfather to his grandson. 1001 Nights is a collection of some of the most beloved stories of all time: Aladdin, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, the 7 Voyages of Sinbad the Sailor, but in the larger narrative, they're also just a series of ingenious cliffhangers designed by the storyteller Scheherazade to keep her husband, the king, too entertained to behead her. The embedded stories are usually what you come for. They tend to be the substance of the work, the core. But there's something that the outer story, what we commonly call the frame story, adds to the experience, the value of which I think is hard to overestimate. Because the frame is not just a decorative border around the story we're here to consume. It's a window frame, the unique and precious lens through which we view the story. It's a little hard to explain just how this part of the narrative affects all the rest, so let me show you instead. I found one of the single most effective frame stories I've ever seen, not in a novel, but in a graphic novel. One you might have heard of before. Mouse by Art Spiegelman. A special thanks to our sponsor, Factor, who helps our humans to have the time to make this show. More on Factor and how they can take the pain out of meal prep later. Mouse is a very singular work. It is not like a lot of the other stories we analyze on this show. To start, it's a work of creative nonfiction. It's the actual story of the author's father, Władek Spiegelman, a Polish Jew who survived World War II. The book invokes the form of classic fables with animals depicting the characters based on their ethnic backgrounds. Jews are drawn as mice, Germans as cats, Poles as pigs, and Americans as dogs. This, however, does very little to blunt the impact. It's simply a matter of artistic license, using the medium to share Władek's emotionality and perspective. It is still, of course, an incredibly dark, depressing story. It's a true story about the Holocaust. Those dark qualities are hard to avoid in a story like this. I may even be worried if the story didn't feel that way. So brace yourselves, because although we aren't here to analyze the historical or cultural commentary the book offers, in talking about it, we are going to have to brush with some painful subject matter. That much is unavoidable. But it's also part of what makes this such a powerful demonstration of the power of embedded stories. The frame of reference the outer story gives to this narrative changes so much about how we interpret the events. The frame story of Mouse is that of Art, the author, interviewing his father for the story. He could have just given us the story his father tells, the parts of the Nazi occupation in Poland and the Holocaust which he experienced. But Art does more than that. He makes sure to tell the story of the telling as well. And it is a story unto itself. It's late in Władek's life by the time Art manages to get the details out of him. He's been through a lot. His wife, Art's mother, had taken her own life by that point. He'd suffered 2 heart attacks. He'd remarried into a relationship of constant strain and bickering. He has a lot of rough edges, terse language, pessimism, lingering shame about some sexual encounters in his youth, even a moment of racism. He's a pretty flawed character, all things considered. Flawed, but sympathetic. This is ultimately the story of a man reliving one of the most horrifying experiences in modern history. Through the frame of his experience and character, we get a very specific window on the war, one shaped by survivor's guilt and lasting intergenerational trauma, an angle most of us could never have viewed this story from on our own. Over the course of Mouse, we encounter some truly horrifying stories from the concentration camps Vladek spent time at. The suffering experienced by those imprisoned there is difficult to fathom, and the book doesn't spare us the details. But through the surrounding story of Vladek and the man he's become, the ways the ripples of that experience have moved through his life, we see a larger picture. The lessons he learned during that hellish time shape who he is now. How he sees the world, how he interacts with his loved ones. Sadly, these lessons aren't always compatible with a gentler, post-Holocaust world. When something breaks, Vladek tries to fix it. Art's tried to help him in the past, but only to be criticized and berated. So instead, he tells his father to hire someone, get some help. But as we see in the embedded narrative, Vladek survived the camps by being useful, having skills to fix things like tin roofs and shoes. He learned how to be self-reliant for self-preservation, a valuable lesson from the war that just doesn't translate as well to the new world he occupies. In his old age, he'd do well to let someone help. Alas, he cannot. In a similar vein, he's also learned to be a bit of a hoarder, another acquired facet of his personality which frustrates Art. Of course, Vladek isn't the only one who suffered. I mentioned earlier that his wife, Anya, tragically took her own life. That was in 1968, after her only surviving brother died. Art was only 20 years old at the time, and fresh out of a mental hospital after a nervous breakdown. In telling his father's story, he'd also hoped to tell his mother's, but we learn that Vladek, scarred by the war, by the loss of his wife, lost in his grief, destroyed all her existing diaries. When Art learns about this, he flies into a rage, because now the only window we have to look through is his father. The vision his mother would have provided, the frame of reference she would have given to the story, is lost forever. Art even calls his father a murderer for what he did, and I also have to wonder, how different might Mouse have been with Anya to provide that additional window? Remember, this is a true story. The author didn't simply get to decide this detail. The frame story, the story of the story's telling, matters, even in reality, perhaps especially in reality. But Mouse gets even wilder with its frame story. It's not all Vladek's experience. In one part of the book, the frame shifts to Art as a younger man, working through his grief following his mother's death. He pens a comic called Prisoner on the Hell Planet, a case history, which appears in its entirety within the pages of Mouse. It's an interesting and pretty horrifying read in and of itself, but there's an important moment of connection this project creates for Art. His father, with whom he has such a hard time connecting, who is so reserved and divested, who has never read anything else Art has made, happens to find the comic during the months of interviews and reads it. And, like us, he's able to see the experience of grieving through his son's eyes. The frame story matters. And finally, one of the strangest and most moving parts of the entire story, the frame shifts to the story of the story. Art illustrates himself illustrating Mouse. By now, it's been years since his father's death. The first volume of the book was wildly successful and is getting printed in multiple different languages. Movie and TV offers are rolling in. He has a baby on the way, but success doesn't mean happiness. He's stuck now, unsure how to write and draw about the horrors of Auschwitz for Volume 2 without his father's guidance. As he attends therapy with another survivor, as he listens to his father's voice on tape, as he works through the grief that's rippled through his life as a result of the terrible tragedies his family has had to endure, he slowly begins to shrink. He becomes a child again. And we see, one time and one time only, that he isn't actually a mouse. He's only wearing a mouse mask. Not all narratives need that kind of framework, but I think Mouse really shows us how it can matter. To know a story's narrator, to know the story of the story's telling, changes things. A story told by a politician will sound very different from the same story told by a coal miner, not only because their voices are different, but also because our perspectives of them are different. To see them, hear them, know the person who the events of the story produced, the consequence of the narrative, that is quite a window to look through. a little ironic to be talking so much about the story behind the story when, you hardly even get to see the people who actually make this show. The Taleoids and I, we're just the talent. Happy to be here, and we love what we're doing, but 90% of the work behind this show comes from our amazing team of humans. Audio engineering, video editing, art and design and direction, that's all them. And it is a lot of work. So much work that our director has, now and then, forgotten to eat. Surely because, between shopping, preparation, and cleanup, it just takes so much time. Still, not a good enough reason for us. It'll be hard to make this show if our humans are literally wasting away. Fortunately, we found a really great solution to this problem. A way to eat that requires zero meal preparation, zero cleanup, almost zero planning, is cheaper than ordering in, and is, on top of all of this, extremely delicious and extremely healthy. See this box? This is our director getting an order from Factor. No trip to the grocery store, no chopping, peeling, preparation, or cleanup. Just a batch of fresh, chef-prepared, pre-made, never-frozen meals built to your specifications, delivered right to your door. Whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or just looking to get a little more nutrition, a little more protein maybe into your diet, Factor makes it so easy. This fusilli and ground pork tomato ragu with roasted green beans? Ready in 2 minutes. Incredible. And look, it even comes with a package of shakes to complement the meals. I think most humans want to spend a little more time being creative and a little less time on, maintenance, eating, sleeping, chores, and Factor can absolutely free up that time for you without making a dent in your wallet. In fact, if you visit Factor75.com right now or click the link in the description, you can use the code TALEFoundry50 to get 50% off your first Factor box. Again, that's Factor75.com, code TALEFoundry50. You shouldn't have to choose between enjoying your meals and enjoying your time. Give Factor a shot, solve that problem, and enjoy more time on things that matter. Anyway, that's all for this video. Thanks for watching, and keep making stuff up. I'll see you next time. Bye!